In the vast, sun-scorched plains of 19th-century Texas, where the horizon stretched like an endless promise and the wind whispered secrets of ancient feuds, a lone rancher named Elias Thorne stumbled upon a sight that would forever alter the course of his weary life. As the golden hues of dusk painted the sky, Elias was riding back from mending fences on his modest homestead when he spotted a small figure crumpled beneath a gnarled mesquite tree. It was a girl, no older than 12, her dark hair matted with dust and blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Hair clothing, beaded deerskin and feathers, marked her as Comanche, a people whose name alone evoked fear in settlers like him. The Comanche were legends of the frontier, fierce warriors who raided and vanished like ghosts. Yet, in that moment, Elias saw not an enemy, but a child in peril, her eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. Without a second thought, he dismounted, his calloused hands gently lifting her frail form onto his horse. "Easy now, little one," he murmured, his voice rough from years of solitude. "You're safe with me." Elias's ranch was a humble affair, a weathered cabin built with his own hands after the fever had claimed his wife and son 5 winters past. The loss had hollowed him out, leaving a man who spoke more to his cattle than to God. But as he carried the girl inside, laying her on his straw mattress and fetching water from the well, a flicker of purpose reignited in his chest. She stirred weakly, her brown eyes fluttering open to meet his gaze. No words passed between them, her tongue was foreign to him, and fear silenced her, but Elias knew suffering when he saw it. He cleaned her wound with a rag dipped in whiskey, wincing as she whimpered, then offered her a bowl of stew from his pot over the fire. She hesitated, her small hands trembling, but hunger won out. As she ate, Elias sat by the hearth, watching the flames dance. "What brought you here, child?" he wondered aloud, though she couldn't understand. In his mind, he pictured the raids he'd heard of, Comanche horsemen thundering across the plains, clashing with settlers in a cycle of vengeance that seemed as inevitable as the seasons. Yet here, in his home, the divide felt thinner, more fragile. He thought of his own boy, how he'd have sheltered any lost soul in his name. Kindness, he realized, wasn't a choice born of strength, but of the emptiness that begged to be filled. Night fell like a heavy blanket, the stars piercing the sky like distant campfires. Elias barred the door against coyotes and whatever else prowled the darkness, then settled into a chair with his rifle across his lap. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of his family and the girl's silent pleas. By dawn's first light, she was feverish, her skin hot to the touch. Elias brewed a tea from willow bark, a remedy his wife had taught him, and coaxed her to drink it. She murmured words in her language, perhaps thanks or prayers, and for the first time, a faint smile crossed her lips. He named her little bird in his thoughts, for the way she seemed ready to take flight at any noise. As the morning wore on, Elias stepped outside to tend his chores, leaving her to rest. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. He milked his cow, gathered eggs from the coop, and repaired a loose board on the porch, his mind drifting to the girl's people. What if they came looking? The thought sent a chill down his spine, but he pushed it aside. Selflessness, he told himself, was the true measure of a man, not in grand gestures, but in quiet acts that echoed through the soul. It was midday when the thunder came, not from the sky, but from the earth. Elias froze mid-stride, his bucket of water sloshing as the ground trembled under the hooves of approaching riders. He dashed to the cabin window, heart pounding, and peered out. There, encircling his home like a noose of fate, were 70 Comanche warriors, their faces painted in streaks of red and black, lances glinting in the sun. At their forefront rode a towering figure, his headdress of eagle feathers swaying with each step of his painted stallion. The girl's father, Elias knew instinctively, the chief, eyes fierce as a hawk's, scanning the ranch with unyielding intensity. Panic surged through Elias, stories of massacres flooded his mind, of homesteads burned to ash and families torn asunder. He grabbed his rifle, chambering around with shaking hands, but as he aimed through the crack in the door, doubt crept in why surround him if not to attack? And the girl, had she slipped away to summon them? No, she was still inside, stirring from her slumber at the commotion. The warriors dismounted in unison, their movements precise and silent, forming a ring that left no escape. Elias' breath came in ragged gasps. He was one man against an army, his life hanging by the thread of whatever mercy they might show. But then, an unexpected turn, the chief raised his hand, not in signal to charge, but to halt. He called out in a booming voice, words Elias couldn't comprehend, yet laced with something other than rage, urgency, perhaps even concern. The cabin door creaked open of its own accord, and there stood little Bird, her wound bandaged, eyes bright with recognition. She rushed forward, crying out in her tongue, and the chief's stern facade cracked like parched earth under rain. He knelt, enveloping her in his arms, his warriors murmuring in awe. Elias lowered his rifle, stepping out slowly, palms up in surrender. The chief's gaze met his, piercing through the barriers of language and history. In that profound moment, Elias realized the truth. This was no raid of vengeance, but a father's desperate search for his lost daughter. The girl had wandered off during a hunt, injured by a fall, and her people had scoured the plains through the night. As the chief rose, holding his daughter close, he gestured to Elias with a nod of profound respect. Words failed them both, but actions spoke louder. The chief unclasped a beaded necklace from his neck, a talisman of buffalo bone and turquoise, symbol of protection, and placed it in Elias's hand. The warriors, witnessing this, lowered their weapons, some even dismounting to approach with offerings, hides, feathers, and pouches of dried meat. Elias's eyes welled with tears. He had expected death, but found instead a bridge of humanity spanning the chasm of fear. In that unexpected communion, he saw the power of selflessness reflected back, not as weakness, but as the spark that could ignite peace. The girl turned to him, her small hand touching his arm, and whispered a word that needed no translation, "Thank you." It was a realization that hit Elias like a thunderclap. In sheltering her, he hadn't just saved a life, he had reaffirmed his own humanity, lost in the grief of his past. The emotional climax built as the chief, through gestures and the girl's halting translations, invited Elias to break bread with them. They sat in a circle around a hastily kindled fire outside the cabin, sharing stories through signs and shared glances. Elias learned of the Comanche's struggles, the encroaching settlers, the vanishing buffalo, the treaties broken like brittle bones. In turn, he shared his own tale of loss, pointing to the small graves behind the cabin where his family lay. Tears flowed freely, not of sorrow alone, but of shared understanding. One warrior, scarred from battles, clasped Elias's shoulder, and in that touch, generations of enmity dissolved. The act of compassion, Elias's simple choice to shelter a stranger, had transformed not just one life, but the potential for many. As the sun dipped low, the chief stood, declaring in his language what Elias felt in his heart, a pact of friendship. No more raids on this land. In return, Elias would share his wealth during droughts and warn of approaching dangers. It was a generous exchange, born from one man's kindness, rippling outward like a stone in a still pond. As the warriors rode away into the twilight, their silhouettes fading against the crimson sky, Elias stood on his porch, the necklace warm in his palm. Little Bird waved from her father's horse, her smile a beacon of hope. In the quiet that followed, Elias felt a weight lift from his soul, the isolation that had defined him replaced by a profound connection. He realized that true strength lay not in walls or weapons, but in opening one's door to the unknown. The power of humanity, he understood, transcended borders and bloodlines. It was the quiet force that could heal wounds deeper than any arrow's pierce. Years later, as Elias grew old, his ranch became a haven for travelers of all kinds, settlers, natives, wanderers seeking solace. The tale of that day spread like wildfire across the frontier, inspiring others to extend hands instead of drawing lines. In a land torn by conflict, one act of selflessness had sown seeds of unity, proving that kindness could conquer even the fiercest divides. And in the hearts of those who heard it, from bustling eastern cities to the rugged west, a spark ignited, the belief that humanity's greatest power was not in conquest, but in compassion. Elias Thorne passed his days in peace, his home no longer lonely, but alive with the echoes of laughter and shared stories. For in sheltering a Comanche girl, he had not only saved her, he had redeemed a piece of the world, reminding all that hope blooms eternal in the soul of goodwill.